I've got my scene laid out, and now I want to create rigid bodies. Before I do, I need to delete construction history on any of the objects that will participate in the simulation. So if I select one of these primitives like the sphere, you note that it still has an input node here that has attributes like radius. Rigid bodies don't play well with construction history, so you'll need to delete history on all your dynamic objects. Might as well delete it for the whole scene in this case. So I'll go to the Edit menu and choose Delete All by Type History. And now I don't have any input nodes in there anymore. Now I'm ready to create the rigid bodies. There are two flavors of rigid bodies, passive and active. Passive are immobile objects, like the Earth. It doesn't move. Active rigid bodies are ones that actually will move in the simulation. So clearly my ground plane is going to be a passive rigid body. I'll select it, go to the Dynamics menu set, and choose Soft/Rigid Bodies, Create Passive Rigid Body. As soon as I do that, you'll notice that my channel box is lighting up in yellow. This indicates there's an incoming connection to these channels. So the translate and rotate channels here are being connected to the rigid body node. I can go into the shapes section here and click on rigid body. And you'll see I've got a lot of fun attributes to play around with here, like bounciness and friction and so on. Going a little bit farther down, you'll see there's also a rigid solver node, and that's the master node that's running the whole simulation. We'll get back to that a little bit later. Next, I'll create active rigid bodies on the other three objects because I want them all to move. So I select them, go to Soft Rigid Bodies, Create Active. And they also light up in yellow, and they get their own rigid body nodes added, and they're all connected to the same rigid solver. So if I press play in my timeline, I don't see much going on here. Now I've got 192 frames in my timeline currently. I just typed it in down here, and I've got 8 seconds, okay, and nothing's happening on my screen. And the reason nothing's happening is because there are no forces in the world. There's no gravity here. So I need to add a gravity field to the objects that I want to move. So I'm going to select these three active rigid bodies, and I'll go to the Fields menu. And you'll see there are lots of fields, and they work with different types of dynamics, such as particles and fluids. I'm just going to add gravity to those three selected objects. The gravity field is created at the origin, as you can see here. I'll grab the Move tool and just move it out of the way. Its position and rotation doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is its attributes. So I'll rewind my timeline and press play. And it seems okay, but remember what I said, I've got 192 frames here. So it's playing back my whole 8-second animation in only less than 1 second, or something around 1 second. So that's not quite right. My playback speed is wrong, is what's going on here. So I need to get a reality check on what the actual playback rate is in my timeline. Otherwise, I have no idea what I'm really going to get when I render. So I recommend that you always turn on display, heads-up display frame rate whenever you're doing any kind of animation. And then in the lower right-hand corner of the viewport, you will see a readout of your current number of frames per second. And mine is going around 400 frames a second. It's so fast that it's not even really very accurate readout here. Okay, so we need to constrain the playback to the current time base, which is only 24 frames per second. The easiest way to do that is to right-click on the timeline and choose Playback Speed. And here you'll see there are three options. The default option is Play Every Frame Free, and that means it's going to not skip any frames in a heavy scene. So in a heavy scene, it'll kind of run slow. But in a lightweight scene, it'll run faster than normal. What we want to do is we want to play every frame, but we don't want the playback to exceed the current time base. So I recommend that you should always have it set to Play Every Frame Max Real Time. That's important for dynamics, because if you chose the real-time option, it might skip frames in a heavy scene. And what that means is that you would get inaccurate simulations in a non-trivial scene. The reason for that, by the way, is as it plays through, you can rewind this and play it. As this plays through, it's calculating the simulation based upon the preceding frame. That's called history dependence. What happens on a given frame, like let's say frame 21, depends upon what happened on frame 20. And if you're skipping frames in order to keep a certain frame rate in a heavy scene, then your simulation is going to break. The simulation will also break if you, for example, attempt to scrub. Things are going to get kind of strange. So you can't actually really effectively scrub in the timeline either. All you can do is rewind, play, pause, and step forward one frame at a time. Those are your only options. Again, because of the history dependence, you can't really scrub in here. All right, I'm playing back at 24 frames a second, and I know that for sure now. I've got play every frame, max real time, and that seems fine, but it's moving ultra slow. Why is this happening? Well, the reason this is happening is because there's a mismatch between my units. Remember that I'm using one-to-one scale convention. This is actually 200 units from here to here, and that's 200 centimeters or 2 meters. For the purposes of the models, each unit here is 1 centimeter. But there's an irony in the way that Maya's dynamics work, and that is that dynamics expect that a unit is a meter. So in fact, right now, for the purposes of my dynamic simulation, it thinks that this is actually 200 meters from end to end here, and that my ball is dropping from something like 117 meters off the ground. So it's going to take a really long time to reach the ground under normal gravity conditions. But this isn't all so bad because we can actually just cheat gravity in order to get the effect that we want. In other words, we need gravity to be 100 times stronger than it is currently. So if I select the gravity field and go to the channel box, you'll see the magnitude is 9.8. And that's the true magnitude of the gravity of Earth. It's 9.8 meters per second squared. Again, remember that dynamics assume that units are meters. Okay, well, what I need to do here is essentially multiply this magnitude by a factor of 100. Give that a value of 980. And so now gravity is at the same order of magnitude as the scale of the world. So if I rewind and play, it's actually moving at the correct rate of speed. So we've just sorted out the problem there with our magnitude of gravity.